Hold on just a second, Gene. I think this might be Spot the Wonder Dog.
Who else could it be, Roger?
You're right. It is Spot the Wonder Dog, and every time he leaps into the balcony, it's time to announce for the Dog of the Week when each of us picks the week's worst movie.
Well, my dog is a gang film called Sunnyside, starring Joey Travolta, John's younger and less talented brother. It's a Saturday Night Fever ripoff set in a New York neighborhood. Joey Travolta, like his brother in Fever, is the leader of a small gang that gets into a dispute with another more violent gang.
Sounds familiar.
And as in Fever, Joey has a girlfriend who wants him to get out of his rough neighborhood and then move back into Manhattan.
Sounds even more familiar.
So what we've got here is a double ripoff, a weak imitation of Saturday Night Fever, played by an actor who is a weak imitation of the Saturday Night Fever star. You know, you really have to have a low opinion of the audience to try and pull off a fast one like Sunnyside.
I've got a movie that has a much lower opinion of the audience. My dog this week is called The Dark, and it is the dumbest science fiction movie ever made, I think. It's sort of a police movie about a killer named the Mangler. Now, he could also be the director, by the way. He stalks the city by night and tears people's heads off. Yuck. He turns out to be a sort of Jack the Ripper from outer space, and he can tear down brick walls and smash through doors. And he fries people with psychedelic lightning bolts that zap out of his eyeballs. What great fun. Not only do we never figure out what the monster is or where he came from or why, but at the end we can't even figure out what happened to him. That's in spite of the fact that an announcer comes on and advises mankind that we must always be afraid of the dark. If he's talking about this movie, he's certainly right.
All right, we'll skip both pictures. Well, Raj, we disagree, but not about this little critter. Spot the Wonder Dog. Thank you, thank you. Spot the Wonder Dog who picks the week's worst movies every week.
Listen, Spot, you really sniffed out a bad one this week. My dog is called In Praise of Older Women. Now, what do they mean by older women? It's a little ridiculous. This movie ought to be called In Faint Praise of Girls in Their Mid-30s. The women in question just can't get enough of our hero, Tom Berenger, who makes his way from bed to bed as he immigrates from war-torn Hungary to sex-mad Canada. The film doesn't have the courage to be a hardcore porno film, nor does it have the wit to be a romantic comedy, so it just winds up as a monotonous sexual travelogue. The movie's supposed to be about how older women are wiser and more mature and more understanding than Tom Berenger is. But if the older women in this movie have any insights into the mysteries of the universe, they keep them to themselves. And, for that matter, why shouldn't they? In this movie, that's the only thing they keep to themselves.
You hated that picture, huh? Get a load of this one. My dog is an action picture called Ravagers, one of the end-of-the-world films when the last man on Earth keeps running into new people. Following some sort of nuclear holocaust, Richard Harris stumbles through a deserted town, finds a blind man who gets hit in the head with rocks. Then he meets Ann Turkel, who chases Harris into the woods, where she tells him, "I've been following you since yesterday." Harris asks, "What the hell for?" Turkel says, "Why the hell do you think?" Then the last man on Earth meets more people. Art Carney is a nuclear engineer. And then, of course, the Ravagers, a ragtag mob. The more you destroy them, the larger their number. None of these characters is particularly interesting. Sort of makes you wish that Richard Harris really was the last man on Earth.
Spot, a great job of picking dogs this week, I'm telling you. Listen, speaking of little monsters, Gene, here's Spot the Wonder Dog, but don't worry, he's had his shots.
That's good.
And he's here to announce that it's time for Dog of the Week when we each announce the week's worst films.
Well, if there's a theme to my Dogs of the Week, it's the various ways film companies try to trick us with, for example, phony Bruce Lee karate movies and fraudulent discoveries of Noah's Ark. Now, my dog this week involves another trick, putting a new title on an old film. In 1974, an Italian sex comedy called Malicious was released. It wasn't very successful, but its young female star, the beautiful Laura Antonelli, has now gone on to become quite a sex symbol in such new films as The Innocent and Wife Mistress. So Malicious has been trotted out again, but retitled Malicious. Unfortunately, it's still the same old Malicious, a peekaboo sex comedy about a wealthy Italian widower who wants to marry his beautiful servant, but he has to fight one of his jealous sons for her affections. The high point in the picture, of course, comes when Laura Antonelli takes off her clothes in front of that little kid. And that lasts about 5 or 6 minutes. Unfortunately, Malicious, or Malicious, it lasts nearly 100.
Gene, you think you're unfortunate. Let me tell you about my dog this week. At least your movie had a nude scene with Laura Antonelli.
Yeah.
My dog this week only has a kissing scene with Valerie Bertinelli. It's called C.H.O.M.P.S, which stands for Canine Home Protection System, and it's a slow-moving, badly acted imitation Disney picture in which Bertinelli, who was from TV's One Day at a Time, plays the girlfriend of a young scientist who's locked himself into the garage and invented a computerized watchdog.
Watch this.
Ryan, what are you doing?
There you are. 3 years of hard work.
You built a watchdog.
An electronic watchdog. Computerized, self-activating mobile crime deterrent, unlike any watchdog that ever existed.
What a great dog, huh? Man's best computer. It has all sorts of built-in scientific gadgets, like, for example, it can see through solid walls and run faster than a car and push over trees. And not only can it bark, but it can also make the sounds of machine guns and train whistles. So eat your heart out, Spot. That dog's so smart, I'll bet it's even housebroken.
Made you forget his name.
Right.
Well, this little sex symbol in the balcony reminds us it's time for the dog of the week, when we each pick the week's worst movie. You only get one bark on this show, baby. Okay, go to it, Rod.
I think he's seen my movie. I wonder he stopped barking at all, because my dog this week is a disgusting, violent, mean-spirited thriller from England called Terror. And the ads for it show a terrified woman being prodded by giant knife blades, and I'm afraid that's an all-too-accurate image for this film. This movie hates women, right, Spot? Mm-hmm. It gives us gruesome chase scenes and gory close-ups as a mysterious killer stalks his victims, and the screen is soaked with blood. The audience is stunned with one slashing knife attack after another. Terror is an insult to our intelligence. It thinks we won't care about the characters unless they're murdered on a regular basis, and this is a vile film.
Sounds terrible. You bet, Spot. Now, here's a horror film double bill playing at drive-ins all over the country. Cemetery Girls is one feature, coupled with Grave Desires. Now, when I went to the drive-in, Grave Desires was on first. Maybe I should have stayed to see Cemetery Girls. It couldn't have been worse. Grave Desires is a cheaply made Italian picture about a busload of tourists who wind up stranded in a strange, deserted town. Well, it turns out all the people who live in the town only come out at night, and then they eat all the tourists. Nice town. Grave Desires has some hocus-pocus involving a little boy who keeps appearing and disappearing around a gravestone. But when he puts a little girl in a grave, that's when I started my car and left the drive-in playing Grave Desires.
Well, at least Spot the Wonder Dog knows how to react when he sees a bad movie. He barks, and here he is, bounding into the balcony once again to announce that it's time for Dog of the Week, where we both pick the week's worst movies.
Yes, well, Roger and Spot, my dog is named Patrick. That's the title of a cheap horror film with lofty pretensions. It's a story of Patrick, sort of a human vegetable who's lost most of his senses, but he's developed psychokinetic powers while being kept alive flat on his back in a hospital bed by all sorts of fancy medical equipment. He's supposed to have been in a coma now for 3 years, but what do you know? He isn't in a coma. He can communicate through spitting to a pretty new nurse. One spit means yes, two spits means no. What a marvelous dinner guess this guy would make. Like some more roast beef? He gets jealous of the nurse's boyfriend, and he eventually asks her to choose either the boyfriend, a successful, handsome neurosurgeon, or choose bedridden Patrick. Some choice. Is it going to be Patrick, yes, or Patrick, no? Well, my whole vote on the whole film is decidedly.
Gene, I think that sounds like one of the worst dogs you've ever come up with. And it's kind of a hard act to follow, but I'm going to try. I'm going to say it sounds like it hits a new low, while my dog this week is entitled Up from the Depths. Mm-hmm. It's an ill-sleazo cheapo ripoff of Jaws, in which vacationers at the beach get involved in a running battle with a giant shark. The ads for the movie say the shark spoils their vacation, but I say it's their own fault for being stupid enough to jump into the water after. Why can't they just stay on the beach and throw frisbees at each other? And here's another question. How do they plan to catch the shark? You're going to love this one. After one guy is killed by the shark, his pals tie a rope around his waist and drag him behind their boat using his body as shark bait. Well, one of the women on board is a little bit disturbed, and might even say she's disgusted by this maneuver. But the dead guy's pals say she should have known him when he was alive. Charlie would have wanted it this way. You never really see the shark very well, by the way. The ads kind of make him look like Jaws 3, but in the movie he looks a lot more like a killer catfish in a muddy bathtub.
We'll say to that one, too.
Well, Spot thinks there are a couple of other movies not worth seeing this week, Gene, and so here he is, Spot the Wonder Dog, to introduce Dogs of the Week, where we each pick the week's worst movie.
Yes, and my dog of the week is the latest Bruce Lee ripoff. Why won't producers let that man lie in peace? Profit is why. Everybody's been trying to find the new Bruce Lee after he died in 1973. Game of Death takes a 6-minute fight sequence Lee filmed with basketball star Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and builds a whole movie around it. Now the fight's okay, but after you've seen that, you've seen the whole movie. What goes on before is just another stupid mobster picture with a stuntman doubling for Lee and with the director of Game of Death intercutting shots of the real Bruce Lee taken from other movies. So Game of Death is worse than a dog. It's fraudulent filmmaking.
Sounds to me like grand larceny.
Petty theft.
Okay. My dog of the week this week is a so-called comedy named Summer Camp about a group of aging adolescents with IQs of, about -17. They spend the summer throwing pillows, pies and themselves at each other, and the movie sounds like a ripoff of Meatballs. But no, it was made before Meatballs. It was released afterwards, though, because it was so lousy it couldn't get distributed without riding in on another film's coattails. So Summer Camp is technically about as bad as a movie can be and still be called a movie, and the actors seem about as talented as losers on a game show. But thanks to Meatballs, Summer Camp does set at least one record. It's the first ripoff that was ever made before the original.
Horrible. Now, so much for the dogs. Now to recap our reaction to the main movies on this show.